We are trying to, in the next sort of half an hour, really talk about the value of marketing and PR, whether you're a startup, whether you're a more established company, but particularly with respect to entrepreneurs and startups. I'm going to, we've heard a lot today about the differences between the two markets, but I think particularly from a marketing or PR perspective, I think there are some really significant differences between the markets themselves and how you need to address them. So I want to start very first with Nick and really have you talk about, if you can, give this audience a real sense of what you need to be aware of and the differences between the two markets. I think we all know about the size, we know about the divergence of the audience, but you got to boil this down for us.
Simple.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about three differences, some number of things. Australia, wow, 22.9 million people now. Lady Gaga has 24.9 million followers on Twitter. Australia is not that big. If you look at the population density, we know there's 16 Americans for every Australian. If you look at the population density, and I think population density means the average number of people per square mile, as opposed to the intelligence of the people that reside within the population. But Australia has 2.7, the US has 31.6, and China has 138. So actually maybe it is the second measure rather than the first. Americans like watching TV. They're the second largest TV viewers in the world after the UK. Australia's number 7 in that thing. There's still the average old American over the age of 65 is watching 48 hours of TV a week. The average American is still watching 36. The average kid between the age of 7 and 11 is watching 22 hours a week. So there's a lot of viewing going on, and that's important. Do you know 60% of American homes have more than 4 televisions? That's a lot, isn't it? So there's some numbers. The second thing is, when you look at the numbers, there's this superficial homogeneity about the US, but it's very different, it's very diverse. And there's many ways to consider that diversity. The first thing is, in the Northwest, right, up in Seattle and whatever, they're quite conservative, they're not into conspicuous consumption. You go to the Northeast, you go to New York, etc., they focus very much on cues from Europe, they're much more conservative, a lot less, they're interesting but in different ways than the North. You go down south, they have their own music. That music, by the way, isn't country and western, it's called NASCAR. They also eat differently. And then you come to California, and what do they think about in California? They think about, how do we reinvent the world? How do we create the world? They invented seatbelts, Californians. They were the first people to do no smoking areas. And, it's different. So there's tremendous diversity in one way. Another way is you look at the diversity within the diversity. And I do have to read my notes here for some numbers. 72% of the US is white. Only 58% of California is white. In California, 38% of people are Hispanic. In California, 43% of people, English isn't their first language, whereas in the US, it's 20%. There's 12.6% of the US population is black, whereas there's only 6% in California. So as you are thinking about this country as one big place with one language, it's not. Politics, obviously divided. Sport, reasonably aligned. Australia has 3 languages, I learned. Actually, I did some research. 10% of Australians, and I'm Australian, but 10% of Australians speak like Bob Hawke, right? Australian. 10% speak like Malcolm Fraser, English Australian, and 81% speak like Nicole Kidman, which is apparently the average Australian accent. But it's kind of interesting when you look at the diversity of this country. 30% of all businesses in the US are owned and run by women. I don't know the numbers on this, but I don't know what it was 10 years ago, but I bet you it wasn't 30%. The question is, what's it going to be like in 5 years' time? There's a group here in the US called NAWBO, National Association of Women Business Owners. What are you going to do when you set up a business to talk to them? So the last thing I'll say in terms of differences between the US and Australia, from a marketing perspective, Americans, they kind of like advertising. You know, they don't mind being sold to. They're really numerical and quantitative in the way they think of things, meaning number one, the best selling. That sort of stuff works. They like popularity, as I say. They're quantitative. They're quite fickle. They try new things. They like new things. They like to improve themselves. You know, there's a product here which erectile dysfunction. You know, that thing sells pretty well here. Anything to improve your body, improve your looks, improve your face. They care about that stuff. So I think that fickleness, as well as that drive to improve yourself, is more prominent in this country than it is in Australia. So there's a start.
Does anyone, and I do want my esteemed panelists to weigh in if you feel you need to, so give me the sign and I'll give you the mic. Does anyone want to weigh in? Because I'm going to turn to David next and ask, you know, what are the most common mistakes that people make when they come here or when they start thinking about a US market? And what are the things that you've seen have sort of really not worked? I think it's all day today we've talked about learning from one's mistakes and getting to plan B. What have you seen that you realise was a mistake that somebody made or misconception that somebody had?
Well, I'm going to avoid statistics, even though they're very powerful. A couple of easy mistakes to be made. Number one, getting over here too early. In other words, not having baked your business model or your revenue model before you get over here, or gotten some initial traction. So if you come over here too early, be prepared for some pretty serious criticism. So just make sure you validate your model in Australia before you get here. Number two, attitude. Come over with the right attitude. In other words, you're going to be the world's best. Nick's point about, you know, being a great salesperson goes a long way in this country. I mean, Americans are by far the best salespeople in the world. So you better be able to cut it with them. So none of this feeble, stand in a corner, passive selling approaches. You've got to be out there. I mean, it's the culture. You've got to be able to do that. So adjust your attitude before you get over here. Number three, I think one of the biggest mistakes companies make when they get over here is they go way too wide, way too thin. Okay, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's the common problem. Just focus. I mean, yes, validate your model down in Australia with a little bit of breadth, right, to be able to justify your model, but understand when you get here, you've got to drill really, really deep into one or two verticals, because those verticals will probably be 5 times the size of the Australian marketplace, right? And remember that it's not just America. We live and work in a global marketplace right now. So if you drill vertically, you can do that globally, okay? And you can take your successes from one particular market in a particular vertical and take it global. It's a hell of a lot easier doing it that way. And the other mistake you shouldn't make is not come to an advance event, right?
The point you made at the start about coming too early, if we've got a product that we believe is appropriate for the US market, isn't it better to go to the US and try it and learn as quickly as possible that it doesn't work in the US?
Let me just repeat the question for everyone. So the question is, look, if you're not supposed to come here too early, is it, but if you have a good idea and you think you want to market to a US audience, when's the right time? When is too early or when's too late to get here?
I always have a lot of respect for young Aussie entrepreneurs that put a pack on their back and come over here. But what I'd say to you is do as much validation in Australia before you come, right? Because it's going to be a hell of a lot easier when you get here. Now, how I would validate that is by saying, do you have paying customers? Even better, do you have repeat paying customers? That's an even stronger proposition. So you've got to look for those validation points down in Australia. before you get here, because you'll be taken more seriously when you get here.
Thank you. And I sort of now want to, Simon, I'd love you to drill into some of the ways that you think a lot of these companies can actually start marketing to a US audience. We've talked about the differences between the audiences and what not to do. Can you talk a little bit about sort of, I'm going to ask you to sort of concentrate a little bit more on consumer brands or marketing to a consumer audience. What, you know, for an early stage company or a startup or even somebody who's been successful in Australia, tell us a little bit about the most practical and most effective ways to market to a consumer audience.
Well, I think that one of the most necessary things is to really, really, really know the competitive landscape here. What I see often is companies coming across from Australia, and you ask them, who are your competitors in this space in America? And they kind of give you 3 names, but there might be 80 competitors in the landscape, and they haven't gone beyond level 1 in analyzing the sector. And you've got to be absolutely fanatical about that. Every competitor that you can possibly find's website. So inside their website, you see their thinking, how they're pitching themselves, you see their news feeds, you see the most modern changes, you actually see where they're heading. So many companies make the mistake of actually revealing where they're heading inside their website. So you can anticipate that, you can rip off elements that you need to, you can really create a much better model even before you arrive in the States with a dynamic website attack strategy. And then the second concept that I want to emphasize is you've got to know the zeitgeist of America. You know, you've got to be right into American media, particularly business media, particularly the trade journals, which you should all subscribe to. You should know who prints the best print journal, who has the best blog sites on this subject. And, you know, there's plenty of people you can ask in your sector about that. You can just email people cold and say, you know, email a VC and say, I don't want any money. I just want to know who's the best person I should listen to in this space. And pretty soon you'll have this cadre of knowledge that's updating you about the zeitgeist in your field, but also the zeitgeist of America. You know, if we're selling something to consumers, how do the consumers think? What I would advocate is read a book a month on the culture of the US. And it should be, you know, ideally a book that's come out that month in America, because you're getting the fresh thinking. And what's the easiest way of doing that is just look on the Amazon top 20 list, because the most popular books are the books that are resonating with Americans. So you know that that's more likely to be representing a point of view that Americans agree with. So that when you come over, when you talk about America, you don't talk as a foreigner as much. I mean, you can never, living separately, master it totally, of course. But you speak as if you understand them, both as business people, both as and buyers of your products, and as people, and your relationship to them as Australians.
I want to, just before moving on, I want to ask the whole panel, when is it too is it ever too early to start marketing? And I mean this is, you know, genuinely, I think there are a lot of startups who concentrate very deeply and very specifically on building their product, but don't see PR or marketing as part of that process. And yet for many successful startups, PR can be, or marketing can be the break. You know, we heard earlier again that you absolutely need to have traction. You absolutely need to have a presence in the marketplace to be compelling to a lot of funding sources. How early should you start? I mean, I don't know if you want to get out in front of yourselves with a brilliant idea that then fails, but Randy would suggest that's probably a great thing to do. So is it ever too early to start? Yeah. You're too kind. No, it's on.
It depends very much the industry you're in. If you have a look at the speed of consumer adoption today and you look at the speed, I mean, just hands up here, who has an iPad in front of them?
Not me.
Okay. So this is, or a tablet. Okay. So these devices are the fastest growing, fastest penetrating devices in human history as far as electronics are concerned. So we are more networked, we penetrate, we adopt ideas faster because we are more networked. Social media drives this. You're here in the Valley in a historic time with Facebook going public on Friday, and they can't make enough shares and they can't price high enough. So we're seeing a marketplace that for many things has changed in structure. So if you're one of those businesses or concepts that iterates and develops very quickly based on that social media or the social graph, then you can't get out quick enough.
David, you want to
Yeah,
know?
my only other comment to that is marketing starts with your 30-second pitch.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you should have done first, and hone that, refine it, and get it right, and then start marketing the hell out of it. You know, to every person you speak to, every party you go to, every coffee shop you go to, market that way. But so there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into your 30-second pitch to get that right first, and I think a lot of mistakes are made by not spending enough time and getting enough advice on really honing that strategy.
I think the technical definition of marketing is satisfying consumer wants and needs. So if that's true, then it starts from the very moment, I guess, that you begin to develop the idea. Even if you're just developing it yourself, bouncing it off a few people to get the concept, you know, so that it seems to make sense before you actually start selling it and offering it. So if you think of the product life cycle from inception to when it's sold, maybe that, and therefore the answer, Nina, is, of course, you know, it starts at the beginning.
Roger, I'd love you to talk. We've talked a little bit about sort of looking at larger consumer audiences, if you like, but I know a lot of the people in the room certainly would have an enterprise sector in mind or a B2B marketing strategy in mind. Can you talk about what you've seen is critical to developing a B2B or an enterprise base, and then what you think works, doesn't work?
Yeah, sure. So let me do that through the context of my day job with HP, where I work with very large organisations, telcos, media publishers, and gaming companies. So let's have a look at their business models. If you look at the telcos, data costs are going up to put those LTE networks in, but the revenues are roughly staying constant. Media publishers, if you're in print, your audience is going online, and the rates that you're typically being able to charge your advertisers to reach that same audience are less. You've got two burning platform problems there. So you would think that there would be pretty big interest in other companies about how can we fix this. Well, I had a good discussion with somebody in a telco recently, and he said, well, look, you know, for the little guys trying to work with the telco, the first thing you need to understand is we don't care. And this really harks back to some of the comments earlier today around who you're talking to within the organisation. So if you're pitching to the guy, a CIO or somebody who's head of product, and you say, look, our great little solution to your problem there, it's going to really help you and will save you money and will maybe chop your staff by a third. What's running through his mind or her mind is a couple of things. You know, oh my goodness, I'm going to have my empire cut by a third. You know, are you going to be around? Are you going to be able to deliver? So look, you know, you've got to really have the relationships in place. It's a much longer term play. So, you know, for example, when HP goes after an enterprise account in a sales pursuit, that is an expensive exercise that can cost well into six figures, depending on how big the opportunity is. As a little guy, you're not going to get a seat at the table. But in terms of the opportunities around that, I think there's going to be a shift in the next couple of years. So the sorts of things that I'm seeing HP working on in terms of cloud, analytics, mobility and security, you can see what's going to happen is that these bigger guys are increasingly, they are going to have to work with the smaller guys to get that awesome experience bolted in to their distribution networks, their marketing machines. So a friend of mine I'm staying with, he works for a major US publication out of New York. He's taking them online. It's a print business. He's outsourcing left, right and centre to little guys to try and make stuff work. So you've got to be able to understand a couple of things, I think, to really market to these sorts of customers. One is you're not going to be able to do it direct yourself. You've got to have some proof points where you can show that people think that your particular experience, your app, whatever, is really going to generate interest. Second thing is you've got to build the relationships over a long period of time and really start to get into the minds of the people that in the enterprise that you could be helpful to them. And if you can compartmentalise off a bit where, gee, you know, you can do something small with them so that it doesn't really affect their entire user base, you can take the risk off the table. The risk thing is huge. So it's a different sort of game. It takes longer, it's relationship based, and so typically you really need to get help to do it with an established player, or through people that have really, really great deep connections into those networks. So it's a highly, highly personalised, time intensive activity to market to these sorts of organisations.
What have you, I'd like to open up to the panel too now. What have you seen as some really effective marketing campaigns? And I'd like you to sort of talk perhaps about some emerging companies that you've seen and be it sort of viral campaigns, PR campaigns, etc. Are there effective things that you have seen? And my second question is a marketing/PR person, although they're not the same, by the way, is that one of the first people you should hire? Is it as a sort of an important tool to get you into an enterprise discussion or into a discussion with an enterprise company? Is it important for you to be able to understand the audience such that you can start to pitch to that audience very early? I pick Simon to go first.
Well, just on the second question, I don't think you should hire a PR and marketing person straight away. I think it's. I think you should read a couple of books on it and do what the books say, because that'll cost you $35, and the other one will cost you $3,500 a month. And truly, if you read one good book on it and actually institute what it says, you can do a pretty damn good job of doing basic PR and low-level marketing. And in fact, you will often do a better job than high-priced consultants because they've forgotten the basics. And often this book is written by someone who's more senior than them.
And you have the passion for the business. You know it. You can tell its story. Yeah,
absolutely. And regarding ad campaigns that are interesting at the moment, I think it's fascinating some of the commercial Twitter feeds that are happening at the moment. It's got such sophisticated fakery when it comes to brands and such an obsession with celebrity. When someone that they trust says, have a look at this product, the Americans really get into that product. I mean, it's extraordinary how much they trust the celebrities. So it's really much more than Australians. It's really an incredible phenomenon to see.
Nick, you want to?
Just a couple of comments. There's a concept that was around for a little while, and I think it still exists, it's just not called it, but it's called Twitter Cash. And Twitter Cash is not just paying Ashton Kutcher or Lady Gaga to say something and paying her some money for saying it, but in fact, Virgin America was doing this for a while, where if I had a large Twitter following, which I don't, and I tweeted out that the flight I just did on Virgin America was awesome, and their new service from here to there, the waitress, whatever, the air hostess that was on the thing is awesome or whatever, then Virgin America was paying me money, which meant free flights to different locations around the US. So just think about that as a business model. It's kind of interesting because they're just bartering product, and yet they're jumping on the back of something that's been around for 250,000 years, which is called word of mouth, or people I trust, or friends and family, etc. I mean, obviously all social has done is just magnify an individual's ability to give their perspective on a product or service. I was always able to tell my brothers and sisters and mum and dad that I thought this product was awesome or terrible, okay? All social did was just magnify it. So social obviously is just a critical part of everybody's success.
And to answer your question, who should you hire first? Get someone who can sell.
Yeah.
I mean, really. I mean, that is your number one goal when you get to the US. You've got to do deals. So a nice blend of business development and marketing would be great, but I'm not available, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, I also think, you know, to be honest, I think there are your capacity to access an understanding of your market now is so much greater than it ever has been before. If you are reading TechCrunch, if you are reading, I mean, that's such an obvious example, but you can get deeply into the minds of the Valley, into your product segment. You can develop your own voice in so many different ways as the founder or CEO of a company. And I know I'm putting myself out of a job now, but you don't need a PR. I mean, you might need some good PR advice, but I agree with you. It was a sort of a trick question to see how much you liked me, actually, as a PR professional. But really, truly, I think there are so many wonderful ways for people to be able to develop their own profiles now that you don't need people like me anymore, unfortunately. I want to sort of turn to just a little different type of marketing. We've touched on a little bit. We've talked obviously about the enterprise, about consumers, but Tony, it strikes me that to everyone's point about the first time you start to tell your story is your first go at marketing. Should we be looking at our own networks as marketing opportunities? Are there networks of organisations like Advance, for example? Here's a pitch for us. But is this a good way to sort of get a sense of the market that you're entering into? Do we ignore our own networks and marketing to our own networks at our peril?
It's not the good way, it's the best way, and for many people it's the only way, especially in terms of getting started. These networks of trust are fundamental to an American mindset, and what we see in social media, and certainly the points that have been raised earlier, these recommendations by celebrities is because there's a trust. Even though there's no dialogue there, there's a sense of trust there, so there's a credibility there. So, just as an aside, when the day you graduate as a collegiate, as a collaboration, is the currency that you develop over a period of time. So, there's an interesting book written by Seth Godin called Tribes. So you have to work through your tribes. And we all have the experience that amongst our own friends, there's one person we talk to who knows more about cars. We want to buy a car. There's someone when you move to America who knows more about which school to send your kids to, and so on. So if you forget everything about early learning lessons about coming to America, learn that the social graph or your particular community or your network is the thing you invest in first and will pay you the highest dividend.
I agree. As an active user of networks, absolutely. I want to ask each member on the panel now, judgment time. If you were bringing a young company to the United States, tell me about the things that you would encourage or you would do, and also the things that you just wouldn't do in terms of sort of a marketing strategy. Tony, you get to go first because you're holding the mic.
I think Simon's suggestion about finding the thought leader in the space and getting somehow a way to ingratiate, and I'll tell a dirty secret. There's a gentleman up the back there who I have long held up as the smartest marketing mind in the venture capital industry. Don't look otherwise, David. So Dave Karlik is here, is the co-founder of DoubleClick, was involved in Vantage Point, and a very keen marketing mind. I sought him out early. And if ever I found an early stage business that's in his space, I wouldn't tell anyone else. I'll go straight to him. And I filter what I show him very carefully.
Thank you.
Look, I think it's important to not just have a psychographic audience in mind, like we're after people who do this, but a demographic rather, but to be deep on psychographics. So yes, they are this age and they live in this location, but what are their fears? You know, what are their hopes? What are their dreams? Where are they uncomfortable? Where do they have secret pain? You know, how do they feel about other people? How do they feel about their life going forward, or this industry, or this product going forward? And that's where the richness is, and that's where often niches are found, and that's where ongoing relationship is formed in what they stand for and what they believe, rather than who they technically are. And most people, I find, don't do that kind of work. And some, when they're coming from Australia, say, how can we do that type of work? And the answer is that you ask them. So whether you need to create surveys, which a lot of people will answer, whether you create forums and get seed questions in the forums, whether you can just get groups of people to tell you live, you can find the answer. And it's in the subtleties of their psychographics that I think you're going to find a lot of wealth over here.
So this is a really interesting question for me, because as one of the founders of PushStart, we've currently got 8 companies that are about 8 or 9 weeks into their accelerator program back in Sydney. And it's probably, I don't know, somewhere between 2 or 4 of them, I think they've got a good shot coming to the States. And I also ran a mega entrepreneurship course, which took 30 people through, and a lot of this focus around pitching. And it's not so much about getting the perfect pitch, but understanding the process of customer development and getting to a concise statement of what it is. So the entrepreneurship course, why would you do that over an accelerator? Well, the simple pitch for that was, you do this before you quit your day job or defer university. Understand what you're letting yourself into. So I think you should be looking to prepare beforehand, to really work at test as much as possible. But then it really does come back to the things that Tony and Simon just said around network. If you come over here expecting to get a great response straight off the bat, whether you're seeking to raise funds or to get a customer to commit to getting a sale to you, I think you're going to be struggling, because you won't have that cultural fit. So I think you've really got to come over here, and one of the things that I always counsel startups, so they get a chance to have a couple of visits potentially with venture capitalists and say, look, we're thinking about this thing, we want to run it past you, providing you've done your homework and there's a good match there, you'll hopefully get a meeting. But you can say, look, we're not going to ask for money. We're going to tell you what we've done, and then we're going to come back, well, we'll come back and have another half-hour coffee in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and we'll show you how we progressed. So if you can get the small companies to show that progress intent and to understand the needs and to get those relationships going, then you can tease out the psychographic, the hidden needs, which is where the real buying decisions come from. So it's prepare first and then embark on a process. Don't try and do it one-off.
All good advice. I know we have to be short here. I just say one thing. In this world of rapid change and fast-moving technology, social, the one thing I think you really, really need to give a lot of thought to is customer loyalty. Because if you bring a product or a platform out today, in 2 months' time there's going to be plenty of competition. And so I think you really need to be thinking about why your customers are going to come back to you the next time and build that loyalty.
If I was talking to some Australian entrepreneurs, I think the first thing I'd say is unless your product offering is intrinsically Australian and has a reason for being Australian, don't be Australian. I mean, who gives a shit? I mean, if you are trying to pick up women in a bar, we were talking a lot about dating before, then having an Australian accent is an advantage, okay? I can tell you that firsthand. It is. But as far as business, they don't care. So forget your Australianism, right? And just think about the business. And then the second simple piece of advice is, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, boil the ocean, solve the world or whatever, what can you jump on the back of that already exists? And if we have 30 seconds,
Okay.
Simon and I caught a cab this morning from a new company that you should look up, which I have no investment in at all, and it's called Uber. Has anyone heard of Uber? Right? So what's the Uber idea? This guy built an app and he went around and saw all the black cars that are sitting outside all the hotels in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Boston. And he linked them all together. The existing network of cars existed. He just created the framework that got them together. So this morning in our hotel, I pushed my Uber button on my cell phone. The driver is 3 minutes away. I could see on my iPhone the car driving towards us, and sure enough, there it was all done. So build on the back of something that already exists if you can.
Incredibly helpful. At least I hope everybody here felt it was incredibly helpful.